And now, one of my favorite speakers, and a bulldog through all of this. He wants justice for one and all, and he's not going to go away. So, for those of you that call him an outsider, the family did have connections with Caledonia. His father worked at the gypsum, lime, and alabastine plant that is now Georgia Pacific. So he does have ties to this community. So try not to call him an outsider. I welcome Gary McHale. Thank you.
Thanks for showing up. I know you've already heard quite a few people speaking, and I'm sure they said things far better than what I will say. But I do have a speech that I think we need to hear and understand. I read something on CBC website last night. I'll read it off. It says, in 1928, the government officially predicted that Canada would end its native problem within 2 generations. Church-run, government-funded residential schools for Native children was supplied and was supported to prepare them for life in white race society. We now know that they were subject to physical, sexual, and emotional abuses. We actually know that this went on for close to 60 years. And the problem that I have, and I've seen in human history, is that the politicians, the people in position of power, rarely will come forward to fight against the injustice. They always wait until average people step forward and create a movement to force the government to act. As you can tell by the speakers today, there's no politicians here. There's nobody from the government. There's nobody from any political party. They're all too spineless to show up and speak out against what they know is wrong. They all will agree in private that what is going on in Caledonia is not correct. But when do the politicians and the people in position of power finally step forward and say that openly in front of the cameras? It's only when average people come together, when average people take a stand, then that the people in position of power will feel comfortable to speak out. For 60 years, we had a problem in this country. I'm sure there was many people who wanted to get the message out that there was abuses going on in residential schools. I'm sure there was many people in position of power, whether that was government, whether it was police, whether it was church leaders, who did everything they could to cover up for the abuses that were going on. I can just imagine the propaganda presented by government and officials to make sure that the Canadian public was unaware of the problem. Do you think that the first person who spoke up and mentioned that there were problems in the residential schools was cheered by the Canadian public? Do you think that the government said, oh yeah, you're right, that's immoral, we should correct that? Or did you think that it took years before government officials, before church leaders would admit to the abuses that we all know now were real? On the same CBC website, there is a video from 1962, December 25th. It's a 28-minute video of the life of a residential student. It's called The Eyes of a Child. In it, you will witness the Native children singing Christmas carols, smiling, having fun, while they greet the priest, and while they go to school, learning all the great things they need to survive in society. They're all smiling, they're whistling while they're learning a trade, and when they go to bed at night, in one big voice, all the Native children say, good night. That was a 28-minute video produced by CBC, Christmas Day, 1962. Let's understand one thing. The established government and media never report on the injustices of the day. They always wait until average people step up to the plate, force the public to be aware of the problems, and then they all look back and say, oh, wow, how did that happen? Isn't that a shame? You know, we have, in a modern society, we have media. And I hate to knock the media that are here today, but let's understand one thing. Some of the problems in Caledonia are directly related to how the media has covered the story. I got involved after June 9th of last year, when in an hour-and-a-half period of time the seniors were attacked, the camera crew was assaulted, and attempted murder on OPP officers occurred. And it dawned on me that in this country that we had a group of people who were prepared to use extreme violence to further a political agenda. Now, those kind of groups are around all over the world. But what made the problem worse here is that we had a police department who willfully stood by and witnessed every one of those criminal acts take place and did nothing to intervene to stop the crimes. That's what we have a police force for. That's why we pay taxes. On top of all that, what you have in a democracy when the police force fails is you have media. They're there to report the news as it's occurring so that the public can see, so the public can vote in 2 days and make a decision about how the government has handled the situation. But lo and behold, all you do is open up Toronto newspapers, turn on the media in Toronto, and the vast majority of the stories in Caledonia went unreported. We had Dancer speak today. You know, we had Dancer at Queen's Park in April giving the same speech. We created a video, and we handed it out to all the media that we had contacts with. And as far as I know, there's never been one story produced by the media to cover the life of a family on 6th Line who do not have OPP protection. Why is that? Why is it that the media wouldn't say that is newsworthy? To understand that there's kids and there's parents, their lives are being, they're living in fear. Why would no media want to cover that story? It just baffles me that such things can take place. We hear example after example of how things happen in Caledonia, and you can turn on the national media and you won't hear boo peep. Last year on October 15th, there was probably over 40 media outlets out for the rally. And I don't know one that reported on the contents of the speeches. I don't know one that really put on TV either what Toby Barrett said or Mary Lou LaPratte said or anybody else said on that day. They came here because the county, because the OPP, and because the Ontario government told everybody that there was going to be a riot in Caledonia if people showed up like this. So the media didn't come to hear your story. They didn't come to report on Dancer's problems. They didn't come to look at the injustice that's going on in Caledonia. They came because they wanted to see a fight. Well, we're not thugs here. We didn't come here to give media a show so they can go back and show two people swearing at each other or show somebody who's giving someone else a finger. There's far more important issues here today than you guys capturing a picture of two people yelling at each other. The same media that produced the propaganda in 1962 that showed that somehow all Native children are happy to go to camp at some residential school. They're all dressed great, they're all fed well, they're all living happy ever after. The same media that produced that propaganda is the same media today, many times, producing the propaganda that I see on TV. I remember hearing a story last year. 2 female OPP officers accidentally drove into D.C. They were swarmed, they were taken out of their car was destroyed, and the government had to send in negotiators to get their release. That's kidnapping. I don't know anybody in any other town who could stop OPP officers, take them away, and not be charged with kidnapping. But you know how the Toronto media, one newspaper reported that? Native volunteers escorted the 2 female officers back to the OPP line because they got lost. There was nothing about the car being destroyed, nothing about them being taken out of the car. Somehow it was sanitized to believe that the communities were coming together and that they were cooperating with the OPP. That's why I got involved. I have photos on my website that would be front page photos in any newspaper in the United States. They've never appeared in a single newspaper in Canada. Why is that? We have CH News a year ago was threatened by McGuinty's own office that if they let us go on TV, then Dalton McGuinty would make sure that they would never do any more interviews with government officials. In the past 3 weeks, we have CH News saying the exact same thing, that they have been threatened by Dalton McGuinty's campaign media person, Ben Chin, for their coverage of a story. Now you think that would be nationwide news that a media outlet is being threatened by the Liberal Party. I haven't read one story anywhere. I haven't seen coverage of that in Toronto. I saw for weeks how the media covered or whined about how Harper controls the media in Ottawa, but I haven't seen one story by any media that talks about how Dalton McGuinty's not only trying to control questions, but directly threatening media on what stories they cover. Why is that? Is it not newsworthy? Is it only newsworthy when it's the Conservative Party that's trying to intimidate the media? Like, there's some serious questions. Like, there's a public trust built up between the public and the media. Now, the reason I'm harping on that is because a year ago when I came to this town, there was nobody that was prepared to stand before a camera and give their name because nobody trusts the media. There was nobody who believed that if they gave you a quote, that they would trust that it would make it on TV or make it in print because they knew full well that you always had to sanitize the news. Now, you maybe don't believe that, but the people here believe it, right? In April of this year, CBC French station was at my home for several hours. And they were there to listen to radio transmission of OPP and Six Nations security. We listened for several hours just to a couple of days of transmission. And in those transmissions, just out of 3 days worth of transmission, you had evidence where Six Nations or DC security would authorize the shooting of OPP officers or residents if they got closer to DC. We heard right from their own tape how OPP had to constantly adjust how they policed, not just DCE, but everything else going around in town as they respond to emergency calls. You could hear how the security on DCE would create roadblocks on the different roads to interfere with the OPP operations. It's not just an issue of whether or not they control DCE. They want control of the entire area. And once again, we have the OPP repeated examples where they will cave in instead of dealing with it. Can you imagine? In one particular case, there's an officer calling for help, for backup, because he got pepper sprayed, that the OPP would be zooming down a road, and all of a sudden there's a roadblock there. They can't go down that road. Now, what would happen if you and I did that? If we stopped the police in the middle of an emergency call to a fellow officer? I guarantee you we'd be arrested on the spot, we'd be taken away. But no arrests have been made. No arrests have been made for many of the crimes in this town. And that has to be reported. It has to be reported that in Caledonia, regardless on the symbolic arrests that Fantino has done, the vast majority of the crimes have never had any charges laid against.